Yesterday, while the President of the United States was ordering deadly strikes on Nigeria and wishing dead terrorists a Merry Christmas,
the Prime Minister of Canada was petting his cat and telling us to calm down.
Welcome to the Split Screen. Today, we're talking about why Trump bombed a country on Christmas, why Carney is ignoring him, and how Canadians quietly won the economic war of 2025.
So grab a drink that isn't from a Trump-loving distillery in Kentucky, settle in, and let's start with Christmas. Because if you want to understand where these two countries are heading, that day tells you everything.
Christmas is supposed to be the one moment when even the worst of humanity pauses. In 1914, in the middle of World War I, soldiers climbed out of the trenches, stopped shooting, shared cigarettes and chocolate, and tried to play football in the mud of no man's land.
For a few hours, the guns went quiet. Even in hell, people looked at the calendar and said, "Not today."
Fast forward to now, on Christmas Eve, Deb and we were having fun with our little salute to Seinfeld's Festivus. We did the silly airing of grievances joke because that's what Festivus is. Cartoon nonsense about people yelling at each other over dinner.
Then Christmas Day shows up and the President of the United States basically says, "Hold my eggnog, I'll show you what a real airing of grievances looks like." His starting point, "Merry Christmas, you scum," followed by dozens of deranged messages all day long.
So while families around the world are trying to get through one day without more bad news, he turns Christmas into a live-action trailer for his own personal crusade. And here's the part that should make every Canadian nervous. This is exactly how he justifies everything he does now.
It's the same pattern. Invent a crisis, declare yourself the only savior, blame radical left sleazebags and whoever else is on his enemies list that week. And this week, he claims he's defending Christians from genocide in Nigeria, even though independent data shows violence is complex, regional, and hits Muslims as well.
And the scary part isn't that he did this just in Nigeria. It's that he's doing it on autopilot to everyone now, outside the old guardrails.
So what does this have to do with Canada beyond the obvious, we don't want a man like that anywhere near our foreign policy? Well, it has everything to do with how we respond. Because on the same holiday where Trump used his platform to threaten his enemies and brag about war, our Prime Minister used his talk about peace, responsibility, and long-term planning.
That's why Canada's pivot matters so much. When Trump spends Christmas threatening enemies and rewriting reality on Truth Social, and Carney spends Christmas talking about stability, alliances, and long-term plans, those aren't just two styles. Those are two very different futures. One where America drags everyone into its chaos, and one where Canada quietly builds economic and political independence.
And when our Prime Minister talks about the world, you can hear how much the ground has shifted. A middle power like Canada not only has resources, we have Canadian values that everyone is looking towards. If you watched his Global News interview, you'll see that he lays it out in that pragmatic Carney way.
He flat out says this is a hinge moment. The old rules-based order is cracked, big powers are doing whatever they want, and middle powers like Canada have a choice. Cling to the US as it lashes out or build something new with everybody else.
And here's the part that should make every Canadian sit up a little straighter. Prime Minister Carney made it clear that virtually everybody wants to do more with Canada. Asia, the EU, the UK, Gulf countries. He literally points out that the UAE came to us with the $70 billion investment package. We didn't beg for it.
No, Canada is winning because we finally have a government that's willing to take a short-term hit for a long-term future, and a world that actually wants to work with us.
The only way we lose now is if we decide we're tired of winning the boring way and hand the keys back to the people who want Canada on its knees in front of Washington. So we need to stay the course.
This pivot will take time, for sure, but let's be clear about why the world wants to deal with us and why Trump wants us on our knees. We have what everyone needs: energy, critical minerals, and brains. Carney never falls back on grievances or slogans. He tells the truth and he shares his plan. And Carney lays it out. He admits that Canadians are still getting crushed by prices. Then he explains what they're changing. Cut the dependence on the US. Big investment in clean electricity and nuclear. Carbon capture and methane cuts.
But we still keep what makes Canada great, our values. A national school food program locked in. Childcare, pharmacare, dental, healthcare transfers protected, even in a tight budget.
And the fact that we're using defense spending and big projects to build Canadian industries instead of just shoveling 70 cents of every dollar to American contractors.
And he keeps circling back to the same message. We are more independent from the United States than we were at the start of the year. But if we want that to stick, we have to keep going. We don't want to rush into a bad trade deal, and we don't blink every time Trump throws an outburst on Truth Social. We stay disciplined and we hold the line.
And if you missed the interview, we have it in the links below in our sources section. Because this is how you interview a prime minister, people. Donna Friesen asks direct questions. She lets them answer, she follows up where it matters on pipelines, climate, affordability, without turning it into some theatrical gotcha performance piece.
Yeah, compare that with some of the CBC stuff where you can almost feel the host reaching for that big aha moment instead of just drilling down on the policy. We watch all of it, CBC, CTV, Global, everyone. But if you're asking us what to put on your watch list right now, Global's Year End with Carney, and on the CBC side, Power and Politics with David Cochrane. That's when you want a role model of how to push hard without turning it into a personality contest.
Exactly. Ask tough questions. Yes, please do that. But don't make yourself the main character. In this moment, Canadians don't need a host chasing viral clips. We need interviews that help people understand why boycotts hurt, why diversification matters, and what stay on track actually means for their rent and their grocery bills.
And that is where the contrast between the two leaders comes into focus. One speaks calm to all Canadians. The other is a man-child with a keyboard having a Christmas meltdown.
He spends the day cramming everything in there. He claims there's no inflation, even though prices are still hammering American families. He claims crime is at historic lows, while cities are literally dealing with surges in violent incidents.
He brags about tariffs supposedly bringing trillions and making America rich, while his own trade war has wrecked jobs, rattled allies, and pushed companies to rethink investing in the U.S.
And then he finishes with bombing Nigeria. He announces on social media that he has just ordered powerful and deadly strikes in northwest Nigeria against what he calls ISIS terrorist scum, slaughtering Christians at levels not seen in centuries. He even ends it with, "Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists." It's like he's marketing a holiday special or something. It's grotesque. And this is how he spent his Christmas day.
And that's why we need to talk about not just what he did in Nigeria, but why it matters for Canada.
And in order to do that, we have to give you a little background. Here's what we actually know from reporting, not from his keyboard. The violence in Nigeria is not made up. Over the last few years, more than 10,000 Nigerians have been killed by insurgency, terrorism, and banditry.
You have Boko Haram and ISIS-linked groups attacking villages, kidnapping schoolgirls, burning churches, attacking mosques, and going after farmers and herders and anyone else in their way.
So when Nigerians say, "We are being killed for our faith," that is real. But here's where the picture gets more complicated and where Trump's story really starts to crack.
Nigeria's own government keeps saying this isn't just Christians versus Muslims, and the Vatican has weighed in and said the same thing. This is not a simple religious war. It's a social conflict driven by land disputes, by a failing state, by herders and farmers fighting over resources, then dressing it up in religious language.
In other words, it's messy. It's about land, oil, cattle, water, corruption, and a government that can't protect people. Religion is part of it for sure, but it's not the whole story. He takes that mess and flattens it into one line. Evil terrorists slaughtering Christians, heroic America flying in on Christmas to deliver divine justice. There's no mention of Muslims being killed, no mention of state failure, no mention of land or oil or climate pressure. Just a simple crusade with him at the center.
And this is where we need to talk about pattern, because he keeps doing this with the same kinds of places. He talks tough on Venezuela, strikes boats in the Caribbean, he puts up blockades, seizes tankers, he cuts deals around who controls Venezuelan oil.
The speech is always about values. Drugs, fentanyl, Christian persecution, freedom, security, protecting innocent people. but somehow the spotlight keeps landing on places sitting on top of oil, gas, minerals, or shipping lanes.
Now he suddenly cares very deeply about Nigeria, the biggest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa, sitting on enormous reserves that have been fought over for decades.
So yes, Nigerians are suffering. Yes, Christians there are scared, and Muslims are too. But when Trump decides to announce airstrikes on Christmas and then wrap them in Christmas blessings, he's not just comforting victims. He's sending a message about power. And that message is aimed at every country he sees as a resource bank, including us.
Canada is in a dangerous position. Our oil, our gas, our hydro, our critical minerals, our Arctic waters. He talks about turning us into a resource supplier, a sort of glorified warehouse for the United States.
But here's where the people come in. We all come in. Because this isn't just about what the government signs in Brussels or Abu Dhabi. It's also about what millions of Canadians did this year with their own money.
Yeah, Trump promised economic war on Canada. Remember that? He bragged that tariffs and pressure would bring us crawling back. He talked like our economy was a toy that he could break whenever he felt like it.
Well, that didn't go the way he thought, did it? Canadians didn't just sit there and take it. We changed our habits. People canceled U.S. trips. They decided Florida wasn't worth the hassle. They chose Nova Scotia, Quebec, BC, Mexico, Portugal, Costa Rica, Spain, Vietnam, Croatia, tons of different places. They moved that winter spending to places that weren't threatening to turn Canada into a glorified gas station.
Border crossings dropped. U.S. businesses and tourist hubs started noticing that the Canadian plates weren't filling their parking lots anymore. Hotel managers in snowbird states started quietly wondering, where did everyone go?
And then we saw it hit something very specific. Alcohol. There were American distilleries whose owners went all in on Trump's annexation talk, insulted Canada, treated us like a conquered market, and expected Canadians to keep buying anyway.
Well, Canadians looked at that and said, nope, we're good, and sales evaporated. Those distilleries struggled and closed, and suddenly the idea that boycotts never worked looked a lot less convincing. When enough people decide that their money isn't going to fund people who cheer on threats against their own country, it shows up in the balance sheets.
Every skipped flight, every rebooked winter, every bottle left on the shelf instead of going to the cash register added up. The so-called economic war he promised started bouncing back at him. And on our side of the border, we were forced to do something that we should have done years ago. Look around and realize we had other options.
Now, none of this means we're invincible. We're not. Our economy is still tied to the United States in huge ways. Trade disputes still hurt, and bad decisions down there still ripple up here. But we're not as helpless as Trump wants to pretend, and we've already proven it.
We've proven that if he threatens our economy, then we can respond with our own choices. We can still enjoy our lives, travel, share experiences, and at the same time refuse to fund a system that actively is hostile to our sovereignty. That's why this next year matters so much.
Yeah, it's very easy now heading into 2026 to get tired, to think, well, I skipped Florida once, now I can go back, right? To think, just one more trip, one more purchase from a company that openly backs Trump, one more shrug at politics. It doesn't really matter, right?
And that's always how this goes, right? People stand up, they make sacrifices, they change habits. It starts to work. And right when it's working, comfort whispers, okay, you've done enough now. You can relax. That is exactly why we can't relax.
Because on one side of the border, nothing has calmed down. The president is still on his phone on Christmas Day calling his own citizens scum and bragging about airstrikes like he's writing a movie poster.
He still talks about using tariffs as weapons. He still flirts with the idea of owning Canada. He still signals that he's happy to turn complex conflicts into simple crusades if it helps him politically. We don't get to pretend that isn't happening just because we'd like one more cheap week in Orlando.
So here's what we're asking. If you were one of the Canadians who changed your behavior this year, don't treat it as a one-time protest. Treat it as your new normal.
If you discovered that you actually like spending your winter money elsewhere, keep doing that. If you stop buying from companies that mouth off about annexing Canada, keep that standard.
If you started paying attention to which media outlets actually explain what's going on, keep supporting them. And if you found your voice in the comments, in your community, at the ballot box, keep using it.
Because Trump's economic war on Canada didn't fail by accident. It failed because millions of people quietly chose a different path.
We have a prime minister who is telling us the plan is working, but only if we stay on this track. We have allies who are watching what we do and deciding whether we're just America's nervous neighbor or a country that can stand on its own. And we have proof that our choices matter.
Canada is winning this round by walking away, by diversifying, by standing with real partners, by using our wallets as well as our words. We only win the bigger fight if we remember why we started doing this in the first place.
So tell us in the comments, what's the one thing you're going to keep doing in 2026 to keep that momentum going? Could be where you travel, what you buy, who you support, who you refuse to reward. Just one thing. Put it in writing and hold yourself to it.
So that'll do it for today. Keep that Canadian pride going. Hit like, share this with a friend who's just thinking about going back to Florida, and subscribe if you want more straight-up Canadian commentary on a world that thinks bombing on Christmas is something you brag about.
Canada doesn't have to match that energy. We just have to keep our heads straight and our standards up and keep walking our own path.
Because whether Trump likes it or not, Canada is not a resource depot. We're a country, and we plan to act like one in 2026.
So check out our Substack, check out our merch, and all the links before. There's a whole Christmas array of links to get your presents. And enjoy the rest of the holidays, everyone.
As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.